The greatest general in history, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a military strategist and leader who is considered to be among the finest in the history of the planet. As well as being harsh and tyrannical, he was also extremely ambitious to the point where he considered himself to be divine. The culture of Hellenistic civilization extended over these countries as a result of his conquests of the Mediterranean nations, the Persian Empire, and the components of India. Acquire a position of power. King Philip II and Queen Olympias welcomed their son Alexander into the world in the year 356 BCE in the city of Pella, Macedonia. He began his studies with Aristotle while he was in his early teens, and it was Aristotle who kindled his interest in both philosophy and science. Nevertheless, he was most successful in matters about the military. Alexander, who was only 18 years old at the time, launched a cavalry assault that assisted Philip in ultimately winning the battle against the Greek states that were allied with him. 336 was the year when Philip was murdered. As a result of the army's unanimous support, Alexander was able to ascend to the throne without any opposition. In addition to inheriting a highly trained and mobile military force, he also inherited his father's desire to lead the Persian Empire to victory. The Greek states and Alexander the Great. Following his accession to the throne, Alexander made urgent moves to establish his authority over the Greek states and to make preparations for an invasion of Persia. Alexander quickly destroyed the armies of Thessaly, the Triballian Thrace, a coalition of Illyrians who had invaded Macedonia, and the city-state of Thebes, which he burned to the ground. All of these victories occurred in rapid succession. Macedonian garrisons were left in several Greek states after the Greeks acknowledged his sovereignty. The Greeks were intimidated by his power. Conquest of the Persian Empire to the west. Alexander the Great was well aware that to keep the army that Philip had constructed, he would require the wealth of Persia. The invasion of Persia by Alexander the Great occurred at a very convenient period. The Persian army was less disciplined and poorly led, even though it had a larger number of soldiers than its own. The king of the Persians, Darius Aelia, was already experiencing a loss of power over certain regions of his empire. A huge and well-trained army consisting of cavalry, foot soldiers, archers, and javelin throwers was under Alexander's command before the conflict. Ptolemy, Cassander, Antigonus, and Seleucus were among the group of highly skilled and reliable generals that he had at his disposal. The fact that he was able to quickly adapt to shifting situations on the battlefield was one of his most valuable qualities. Because of these advantages, the Macedonian monarch never suffered a major defeat in any of the 11 years that he spent campaigning. Alexander the Great defeated Darius' army at the Granicus River and Issos in the years 334-333, which resulted in Darius being forced to flee. Alexander the Great conquered Syria, Phoenicia, and Tyre in the year 332. He then moved on to Egypt, where he established the renowned city of Alexandria. Following that, he triumphed over Darius for the very last time at the Battle of Gaugamela. Following Darius' death in the year 330, Alexander the Great declared himself to be the king of Asia. Over the subsequent 2 years, he worked to strengthen his authority over the Persian Empire and the tremendous wealth it possessed. During his campaign, Alexander demonstrated his capabilities beyond those of a war veteran. His administration included the incorporation of native monarchs into his government, the establishment of democracies in several nations, and the establishment of several further towns. Several professionals, including engineers, architects, scientists, and historians, were a part of his network. He disseminated Hellenistic societies and monetary systems throughout the western and central regions of Asia. The fact that Alexander came to believe in his divine ancestry was another factor that led to conflicts with his army. The Macedonians did not agree with this concept. Despite this, Alexander continued to insist on his divine status, even going so far as to etch a godlike picture of himself onto coins. India was invaded by the British. Alexander, armed with a newly strengthened army, launched an invasion of India during the summer of 327. His ultimate goal was to traverse the ocean and arrive at the Indian Ocean. By attacking the seemingly impregnable pinnacle of Ornos, which is located a few miles west of the Indus River, Alexander was able to impress the traditional Indian rulers of the area. This was Alexander the Great's final major conflict, which took place on the banks of the Hydaspes River on June 1, 326. He triumphed over a somewhat larger army that was led by King Porus, who would later become a powerful ally. Alexander the Great's troops, who had been engaged in relentless campaigning for years, rebelled and insisted on going back to their homes while they were at the Hyphasis River. Alexander unwillingly led the army back across India, putting down rebellions and purging corrupt governors along the route. They were successful in their mission. By the year 324, he had arrived in Susa, which is located in Persia. At the end of the day, he brought a great number of his warriors back home with honors and wealth. The legacy of Alexander A. In the year 323, Alexander the Great was on his way to Babylon to make preparations for an expedition to Arabia when he unexpectedly became unwell. The 13th of June was the day he passed away. His empire was divided into several independent kingdoms. For more than 2,000 years, the life of Alexander has been a source of fascination for historians as well as the general public. The history of both Europe and Asia underwent a revolutionary change under his reign. The voyages led by Alexander the Great contributed to the advancement of geography and natural sciences, as well as to the movement of the major centers of civilization toward the east. The dissemination of Hellenistic civilization from Gibraltar to the Punjab regions was his most significant accomplishment. These huge cultural and commercial networks were connected by the Greek language and coinage, which functioned as common connection points. To a certain extent, Alexander's accomplishments were instrumental in laying the groundwork for the establishment of the Roman Empire, the propagation of Christianity, and the dominance of the Byzantines for centuries. As a summary, the most influential military commander in ancient times, he received his education from Aristotle, who was the son of Philip of Macedonia. At the age of 18, he contributed to the victory at the Battle of Chaeronea, demonstrating his military prowess. In the year 336, he replaced his father, who had been murdered, and swiftly conquered Thessaly and Thrace. He ruthlessly destroyed Thebes, destroying everything in the city except for its temples and the house of Pindar. The annihilation of this kind was going to be his usual tactic, and the other Greek states were going to humble themselves. After crossing into Persia in the year 334, he was successful in defeating a Persian army at the Granicus River. According to tradition, he was destined to rule all of Asia since he cut the Gordian knot at Phrygia, which is the name of the city where the event took place. He was successful in defeating another army at the Battle of Issus in the year 333. This army was led by the Persian monarch Darius, who was nevertheless able to flee. After that, he conquered Syria and Phoenicia, so preventing the Persian fleet from accessing its ports. Next, in the year 332, he conquered Egypt, after completing a siege of Tyre that lasted for 7 months and is considered to be his greatest military achievement. While he was there, he was presented with the double crown of the pharaohs. He established Alexandria, and he went to the oracle of the god Amun, which served as the foundation for his claim to divinity. In 331, while he had the eastern Mediterranean coast, he beat Darius in a decisive fight at Gaugamela. However, Darius managed to flee once more throughout the conflict. Following that, he conquered the region of Babylon. In the year 330, he torched the palace of Xerxes, which was located in Persepolis, Persia. He also had a vision of an empire that would be administered jointly by Macedonians and Persians. He proceeded eastward, putting an end to any intrigues that were either genuine or imagined among his troops, and establishing authority up to the Oxus and Jaxartes rivers, most of which were named Alexandria, to maintain control of the country. After he had conquered the territory that is now Tajikistan, he with the princess Roxana and embraced Persian absolutism. He also adopted Persian clothing and enforced Persian court practices. In the year 326, he arrived at the Hyphasis in India, where his exhausted soldiers started a rebellion. He then turned around and marched and pillaged along the Indus River until he arrived at Susa with a significant number of casualties. He persisted in advocating for his unpopular doctrine of racial fusion, which appeared to be an attempt to create a master race consisting of Persians and Macedonians. Alexander the Great made sure that his favorite Hephaestion was given a hero's funeral after he passed away, and he also made sure that divine honors were given at his funeral. After a long period of drinking and eating, he became ill in Babylon and passed away at the age of 33. His final resting place was in Alexandria, Egypt. His kingdom went all the way from Thrace to Egypt and from Greece to the Indus Valley. It was the most powerful empire that had ever existed up until that point in time. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative